Welcome to everyone that's watching the webinar. We're so excited to have you, and it is my great pleasure to introduce feminist scholar, organizer, and activist Loretta Ross, currently a professor at Smith College in the program for the study of women and gender. And it's important to say that Professor Ross is one of the central architects of a reproductive justice framework, and is celebrated for her work in crafting a theory of reproductive justice in 1994 and in building the reproductive justice movement as the national coordinator of SisterSong Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective from 2005 to 2012, which successfully confronted an ever more organized and well-funded anti-abortion movement through on-the-ground campaigns like SisterSong's Trust Black Women campaign in 2010. But which also, and very importantly, challenged a narrow pro-choice framework by promoting a more expansive reproductive justice framework through tireless coalition building, and also through publications like SisterSong's Collective Voices, and through books like those that Loretta Ross has authored in 2004, Undivided Rights, Women of Color Organize for Reproductive Justice, which offers case studies of a number of organizations like Carasa and the Mother's Milk Project that use a reproductive justice framework. And then more recently, her two books, which Loretta I teach often, the 2017 Reproductive Justice and Introduction, and then the collection of essays also published in 2017, Radical Reproductive Justice Foundations Theory, Practice, Critique. And just because I want everyone, including my students that are on this webinar, to know, to have a real sense of Loretta Ross's 50 plus years of dedicated movement work, I just want to point to a few other highlights in your movement work since the 1970s, which includes serving as the executive director of the DC Rape Crisis Center, serving as the national program director of the National Black Women's Health Project, launching the Women of Color program for Now in the 1980s, serving as the national co-director for the 2004 March for Women's Lives in DC, then at the time, the largest protest march in US history, with 1.15 million participants at the time. And then most recently, teaching at Smith, but also working in collaboration with the Voices of Feminism Oral History Project at Smith and collecting oral histories from feminists of color to add to the collection. So just a brief overview of all of your incredible movement work. And we're just so delighted to have you and have you talk about reproductive justice and tell us about reproductive justice as a human rights, as reproductive justice as a human right, and to talk about the reproductive justice framework. So I turn it over to you, Loretta. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for that wonderful introduction. As you were reading my bio, I felt a little weird because I am the world's most accidental feminist. I had no intention of becoming a professional feminist. As a matter of fact, when I went to college in 1970, I majored in chemistry and physics. I thought I was going to be in a laboratory doing inorganic research for the rest of my life. But my plumbing, or more specifically, the things that happened to me, got in the way. When I was 14, a cousin of mine who was 27 and married decided that it would be a good idea to get me drunk so he could have sex with me. And of course, that is not how anybody wants to be introduced to sexual activity. And I became pregnant through that incest. And so by the time I turned 15, I had a baby. And I was planning on giving my son up for adoption, because that's not how anybody wants to become a mother either. But I gave birth at a Catholic hospital that was supposed to whisk my son away so that I didn't actually get to meet him. But instead, they brought him to me the day after he was born and put him in my arms. And I kept saying, he's got my face, he's got my face, oh, he's got my face. And so in that moment, I went from being a scared teenager who was pregnant to a mother. And with the decision to keep my son instead of giving him up for adoption, that meant that I was permanently tethered to my rapist. So I had to co-parent with my rapist. And then when I went to college 2 years later, I also became pregnant again, but at least the sex was voluntary at that time. But my mother didn't believe in sex education or sharing any information about birth control. As a matter of fact, when I asked her if I just signed a permission slip for me to get birth control, she told me no, that I just needed to, listen to Jesus and not do those things. And that didn't quite work because I was, 1,500 miles away from home, free and liberated for the first time, at least in my 16-year-old eyes. And so I became pregnant again. And fortunately, my law school boyfriend, he was in his first year of law school when I was in my first year of college, was more than happy to financially pay for the abortion. And I was really fortunate that Washington, D.C., because I went to Howard University, legalized abortion 3 years before Roe v. Wade. They legalized abortion in the summer before I arrived at college. So I was able to have a perfectly safe and legal abortion at Washington Hospital Center. My boyfriend paid for it. The only real problem I encountered was my mother. Because, of course, if you needed parental consent to obtain birth control, you needed parental consent to have an abortion. And my mother and I fought over this over and over again. She thought I should just drop out of school and come home and raise what would have been 3 babies because I was pregnant with twins. And of course, I didn't like that plan. And so my big sister, Carol, forged my mother's signature onto the permission slip. And that's how I had a safe and legal abortion. And then trying not to get pregnant again, I accepted implantation of the Dalcon Shield, which was a defective intrauterine device, a defective IUD. And its defect caused me to be sterilized when I was 23 years old. So my reproductive career was like 9 years, from 14 to 23. And so that kind of deterred me, or at least distracted me, from pursuing a career in chemistry and put my feet on the path towards feminism. And fortunately for me, I was introduced by a member of the Black Panther Party to the DC Rape Crisis Center. And it was at the Rape Crisis Center I learned the words to attach to my experiences. I learned that it wasn't my fault, that I should have had control over if and when I had sex, if and when I became pregnant, the conditions under which I gave birth. I mean, I learned a lot from the feminist movement that made sense of all that had happened to me. And so I tell that story not because, I need somebody to pull out the world's tiniest violin, but because I am always that scared 14-year-old teenager, even though I'm almost 70 years old now, because I think girls should be taught about how to keep themselves safe. And you can only do that with evidence-based sex education. I didn't know what my cousin was doing to me was wrong. I didn't know how to give consent. I thought that it was my fault because I didn't fight. I just agreed to to have drinks, which is, somebody giving an underage kid a drink. Very few kids are going to resist that. And I didn't. I also think it shouldn't be more difficult now to obtain an abortion than it was for me in 1970. Why are we putting all of these obstacles in the way of young women and all women, and of course, people capable of getting pregnant, making the choices that make the most sense for their lives? And so I'm still that pissed off teenager in many ways who says that I'm going to dedicate my life to making sure that what I went through, that we're going to stop other girls from going through that with every ounce of my heart. And so all of those experiences led me to a room in 1994 at a conference organized by the Illinois Pro-Choice Alliance and the Ms. Foundation. And this was in June of 1994. And we had received a presentation at the conference about Hillary Clinton and her attempt to do healthcare reform while, of course, she was the first lady and Bill Clinton was president. And in this presentation, they said something about how they were going to omit reproductive health care from the healthcare reform proposal in the hopes that it would lessen Republican opposition to the legislation. Well, you can imagine that didn't work very well because Republicans can be mean, but they weren't stupid. They knew that they were going to be unalterably opposed to healthcare reform, as we continue to see them fighting universal healthcare for people. But nonetheless, after this presentation, there were 12 of us Black women who were at this conference of about 200 people. And so one of them, Abel Mabel Thomas, who was our Georgia state legislator at the time, called a meeting in her room to discuss what we were going to do about this bizarre plan of the Clinton administration. And what made it so bizarre to us was that why would you come to a feminist conference and ask the feminists to endorse such a male-centric healthcare plan? Because if you omit reproductive health care, you're omitting the major driver of women to the doctor. I mean, after your period, your second on becoming a woman moment is your feet up in those stirrups. And so we said, this isn't sitting well with us. What can we do? Well, we weren't all from the same organization. We represented a wide range of organizations. Like I said, there were 12 of us. Some of us worked for Planned Parenthood. Some of us worked for NARAL, or the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice. I didn't even work at a women's organization at the time. I worked at the Center for Democratic Renewal, which had formerly been known as the National Anti-Klan Network. I was actually monitoring and researching on hate groups, but I still had done reproductive health and rights work in the past, and that's why I was at this conference. And so one of the things that we problematized was that abortion was always isolated from the social justice issues that really determine whether a person keeps an unintended pregnancy. Because we call them the oh my God questions. Because if you find out that you're pregnant, or even if you just miss your period, you have all these oh my God things going on in your head. Like, oh my God, can I stay in school? Oh my God, do I have health insurance? Oh my God, what am I going to tell my partner? Oh my God, do I even have a bedroom to put this child in? And the way people actually make decisions is that if they have good answers to those oh my God questions, they may turn an unplanned pregnancy into a wanted child. But if they have bad answers to those oh my God questions, I've seen people turn even a planned pregnancy into an abortion. And so we critique both the pro-choice and the pro-life movement for only focusing on the pregnancy and not going upstream to look at the pre-existing conditions in the woman's life long before the pregnancy occurred. And so because abortion was isolated from social justice issues, we took the term reproductive rights and spliced it together with social justice, and that's where we coined the term reproductive justice. And then on August 16th of that year, 2 months later, we took a full page ad in the Washington Post under the banner Black Women for Healthcare Reform, talking about what we as Black women needed from the Clinton healthcare reform proposal. Now, a lot of people who hear that history think that we created reproductive justice as a way of pushing back on the pro choice or the pro life framework. And that's absolutely not true. Because if we were pushing back on those frameworks, we would have had to center white women in our lens, because that's who mostly populate both the pro choice and the pro life movement. In fact, we centered ourselves as Black women in our lens and asked ourselves, what did we need from healthcare reform? And so that interpretation of us creating it because we were critiquing white women is not true. It was about us centering ourselves. And moreover, I tend to take issue with that distortion of history because it almost presupposes that just because this very universalist theory and intersectional theory was created by Black women, that it only applies to Black women. No, it is a universal theory that applies to everyone because the three tenets of reproductive justice are quite simple. Everybody has the human right to decide if and when they will get pregnant. And so the right not to have a child means that we support the right to abortion or birth control or abstinence if you can hold on. But similarly, because this theory was created by Black women, we fight for the right just as strongly for the right to have the children that we want to have, because we're always subjected to strategies of population control. Our wombs and our children are blamed for everything from the environmental crisis to the mortgage crisis to crime to bad schools. Oh, I think we were blamed for Trump having a fake hairdo. I mean, we were blamed for everything. And so we have to fight all the ideologies of eugenics and population control and fight not only for the right to have our children, but to have those children under the conditions that we desire. So that means that we've given birth to a separate movement called birth justice that deals with the right to use doulas or midwives and to have your birth plan respected once you choose to give birth. And this means that you get to refuse having unnecessary medical interventions like C-sections. If it's not medically required, you get the right to do that. And then the third tenet of reproductive justice is probably its most capacious, because unlike the pro-choice or the pro-life movement, we fight for the right to raise our children in safe and healthy environments. We ask the question, what happens to the child once the child is born? And so that brings us into conversation with inadequate schools, environmental problems, gun violence, tax policies that determine that the rich neighborhoods use property taxes to have the better schools and the poor neighborhoods have the worst schools. There's actually no field of human endeavor that doesn't affect how people are capable and able to raise their children. And so that's the three tenets of reproductive justice as we articulated in 1994. The right to have a child, the right not to have a child, and the right to raise your children. About a decade later, younger activists came into the movement and they offered a critique of the reproductive justice framework, saying it was too womb-centric. It was too focused on reproduction, and that it really needed to be expanded to include body alternative, gender self-determination, and sexual pleasure. And so then they added a fourth tenet, the right to determine what your gender identity is, what the right to participate in achieving sexual pleasure and things like that. And so that's the reproductive justice framework as it's been articulated, but it is immensely adaptable. I've seen people use the framework to talk about sovereignty, for example, if you're indigenous, as a reproductive justice issue, or disability rights and reproductive justice, or environmental justice, economic justice, whatever, and reproductive justice. The most transformative part of reproductive justice, though, for me, was that we created the framework in June of 1994, and in September, I, along with a few of the 12 women that were in Chicago, traveled to Cairo, Egypt in September of that year to attend the International Conference on Population and Development. And I can't speak for the other 11 women, but I was surprised to discover that the women from the global South were using the human rights framework to make the same demands that we were making under the more limited US constitutional framework. And so as we began theorizing and applying reproductive justice, we embraced the human rights framework as the foundation for the things that we deserve and the rights that we are claiming. And so this was something we women in the global North learned from women in the global South, how to make human rights claims around bodily autonomy and reproductive health and rights. And so then people started putting it all together. There's the reproductive health movement that deals with individual service delivery, helping people get their health needs met. There's the reproductive rights movement, another part of our movement that focuses on the legality under the US Constitution of sex education, abortion, and contraception. It's also synonymous with the reproductive rights or pro-choice movement. And by the way, the word pro-choice is still a good word to use if you focus on abortion rights. And then the reproductive justice framework, which works in tandem with reproductive health and rights, is an organizing framework based on bringing more issues and more people into the conversation about bodily autonomy, sexual self-determination, and so on. And I mentioned a couple of times the human rights framework, so I can't go much further without explaining why human rights was so attractive to us. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was authored starting in 1946 by former First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. And the reason that this movement was made by the United Nations was that the world community after World War II witnessed the Holocaust that Nazi Germany had primarily directed towards Jewish people, but not exclusively, because the Nazis eliminated people who were queer, people who were disabled, people who were Romani, people who were mixed race. I mean, they had a whole long hate list that they went after, people who were communists, etc. And so what the world community recognized that what Nazi Germany did, while it was immoral, it was not illegal, because governments have a distressing tendency to legitimate their immoral actions, the same way the United States legitimated genocide against indigenous people to take their land, and the enslavement of kidnapped Africans to make them work that stolen land. And so through the United Nations, after the Holocaust, First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt decided that we needed a body of laws and treaties and covenants and conventions that would prohibit what a government did, like Nazi Germany. Because we had international law at the time that prohibited one country invading another country. That was called the sovereignty system, born out of the Treaty of Westphal of 1648. I'm not going to get too much into the history. But we didn't have any body of laws that looked inside of country and prohibited what a government could do to its own people. or whoever was defined as its own people. So while, as I said, what Germany did was immoral, it was not illegal. So First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt chaired a committee composed of scholars from all over the world and from all types of religious traditions. Yeah, she brought in people who were Buddhists, people who were Confucianists, people who practiced the African philosophy of Ubuntu, as well as people from Europe who believed in the Enlightenment philosophy. But they spent 2 years looking at all the different Judaic and biblical and all kinds of sources for guidance on how human beings can coexist and how they should treat each other. And so on December 10th, 1948, they presented the Universal Declaration of Human Rights for affirmation by the United Nations. And the United States actually bullied people into signing this document, but then quickly repudiated it when another administration came into power, a Republican administration came into power, and then decided that it was a communist plot trying to invade America's sovereignty and tell America what to do. And actually, John Foster Dulles, who was Secretary of State at the time, wrote this advisory memo saying, we need to be careful about this Universal Declaration of Human Rights because we don't want our Negroes to get agitated. In other words, we had our government saying that they were going to repudiate the Universal Declaration of Human Rights because it would prohibit the Jim Crow segregation that was the law of the land at the time. We want to reserve the right to discriminate, to segregate. Anyway, notwithstanding that, movement continued around the world towards embracing the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Treaties and covenants were developed to turn those promises into laws. The Treaty on Civil and Political Rights, the Convention on Civil and Political Rights, and the Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. So let me start talking about the categories before I run out of time. In the original Universal Declaration of Human Rights, they laid out 5 categories of human rights protections to which we are all entitled. And by the way, no one gets to vote on whether you're a human being or not. And so that's why they're inalienable. No one can alienate your humanity away from you and say, you're not human enough to get these rights, kind of thing. But the first human right category that we're mostly familiar with is called civil rights. And that's our right to be treated as an equal to anybody in society. And we're mostly familiar with the civil rights framework because there was a civil rights movement that is about ending discrimination and fighting for equality. The second category is called political human rights. These are the rights that are usually referred to in our US Bill of Rights: the freedom of speech, the right to vote, the freedom of association. But let me back up to the right to vote, because we've learned since the election of 2000 that we do not have the right to have our votes counted, so says the Supreme Court. And so we still got a lot of work on political human rights, not to mention the astonishing wave of voting suppression bills that are sweeping the country because Trump lost the last election, and the distortion of the electoral system, where they're trying to intimidate electors and people who run our elections into not even fairly reporting the results or overturning the results if it doesn't produce the results that the Republicans want. But nonetheless, we can fight for our political human rights. The third category is called economic human rights. And these are rights demanded by the labor movement at the time. The right to earn a livable wage, the right to have fair working conditions, things like that, the right to have a holiday, weekends off, those kinds of things. Those are economic human rights. And the way that the Occupy movement recently defined it is the right of our economy to be managed in such a way that it meets the needs of the people instead of only the needs of Wall Street, kind of like the 99% against the 1% uh, analysis. And then the fourth category of human rights is called social human rights. These are the rights to have our human needs met. So your social human rights are your human right to food, to clothing, to shelter, to health care, to social services if you're not able to take care of yourself with things like welfare or unemployment or disability benefits, those kinds of things. And I would argue that one reason that more of the American public doesn't know about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is because too many people have a vested interest in us not knowing about it. As a matter of fact, if we taught young children that education is a human right, well, how could we sucker them into paying $100,000 a year for a college education that should be free? And so too many people have a vested interest, a financial interest in keeping this human rights knowledge away from people. But just because they suppress it doesn't mean you don't have those rights. The fifth category is called cultural human rights. And these are the rights that, as I said, the representatives of all the world's religions talked about the right to religious freedom, the right to determine if and how you worship, so that no government should be able to tell you, you must be this, you must be that, in order to be part of that country. Now, freedom of religion is a human right, but we in the women's movement also argue that freedom from religion is a human right. We have the human right not to have someone else's religious views imposed upon our bodies. And so cultural human rights are the groundwork on which we're contesting abortion rights for women, for example. And unfortunately, the anti abortion movement kind of hypocritically tries to claim that they're fighting for the human rights of the unborn, but they can only do so by violating the human rights of people who are already here. And so, unfortunately, they take advantage of the fact that people have not actually read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because the opening line of the UDHR says all people are born equal in rights and dignity. Even before this whole debate over abortion started, common sense said you have to be here to claim the rights. You know, when they say you have to be born to claim your human rights, that's really important. They hope we don't notice that part of the weakness of their argument. Anyway, those were the human rights in 1948. And then new social movements came about afterwards that started demanding new human rights. So by the 1970s, enough consciousness had been raised about climate change and environmental problems we had that a sixth category called environmental human rights was added. And of course, in that, we talk about not only climate change, but the right to clean drinking water, the right to non-genetically modified food being foisted upon us, those kinds of things. And then the seventh category of human rights is called developmental human rights. And those were the rights that were largely demanded by what we used to call the third world, and was called the developing world, and now it's called the global south. Well, back when it was the developing world, they demanded the right to control and develop their own natural resources instead of having the Western powers with their big, overwhelming militaries come in and steal their gold, their diamond, their rape, their uranium, etc. And it was an anti-colonialist demand that is yet to be met, because nearly every war the United States has engaged in the last 50 years has been over developmental human rights, because we've never been able to explain how our oil keeps getting under other people's sand. and we're willing to topple other country governments in order to secure their oil. And then the eighth category of human rights protections is called sexual human rights. And this again started in the 1970s by the demands of the global feminist and women's movement, where we demanded the right to determine if and when we'll have sex, if and when we'll have children, if and when we'll get married, the right to sexual pleasure. And then this sounded like such a great idea that by 1999, you had the LGBT movement redefining itself as a sexual rights movement, demanding, oh, it sounds like the right to marry, the right to determine if we'll have kids, the right to sexual pleasure. That sounds like a good set of human rights to demand. And so we saw a reframing of LGBT rights away from equality into human rights. But I do want to say one cautionary note to the queer rights movement, and that is don't settle for only one category of human rights, because that's a mistake that the African American liberation movement made. We only focused on civil rights and not the other 7 categories, which, by the way, Dr. King didn't want us to do. He did not want us to restrict ourselves to only one category. But that's how the stories have been told about Dr. King, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, civil rights leader, when it really should be Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, human rights leader. Because in his last Sunday sermon, 4 days before he was assassinated, he called on us in the United States to build a human rights movement. And so to wrap this up, that's why we thought that putting our demands for reproductive justice on a firmer foundation called human rights instead of just civil rights or even women's rights was a pathway forward to bring together different social justice movements, whether you work on environmental justice or disability rights or immigrant rights or trans rights or all of those issues together under a united human rights framework. And so if you're going to use the concept of reproductive justice, we do have some criteria. First of all, it has to be intersectional, meaning intersectionality is a statement of vulnerability. And so what does someone have to put up with that you don't have to put up with, kind of thing? And the best way I know to simply describe intersectionality is by talking about all children have a human right to an education, but a blind child might need her books in Braille. It is her special vulnerability, her special needs that determine what we need to attend to in order for her to have the same human right to an education that sighted children have. And so you use intersectionality to determine what your vulnerabilities are that need to be attended to so that you can have the same human rights as people without those vulnerabilities. But many people have reduced the concept, Kimberly Kinshaw's concept of intersectionality just to a statement of identity. No, it's actually a statement of vulnerability. And so if you're going to use reproductive justice, it must be intersectional. It must be based on the human rights framework, and it must be used in such a way that it includes everyone. And I'll shut up now so we can leave some time for Q&A. Thank y'all for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Loretta. That was wonderful. So let me just say to those that are watching, there's a Q&A icon on the bottom of your screen. And so you can type in questions there that I can see and then ask. So we do have one question, but I'm going to start with a kind of broad question. So feel free to answer this however you want. But given your long and robust history of organizing and activism, I wonder if you would like to, if you would be willing to reflect on the present moment. You know, I know that's a big question, but particularly the usefulness of reproductive justice as an organizing framework in responding to the sort of multiple crises of the present, but also thinking about the way in which reproductive justice as an organizing framework has taken hold in some of the protest movements that are responding to the multiple crises of the present. So I wondered if you wanted to weigh in on the present, in other words.
Yeah, the way that I see reproductive justice writ large is that all empires need bodies. And they need bodies for their economies. They need bodies for their armies. They need bodies for their labor force. They need bodies. And so every era of humanity has tried to control which bodies matter, which bodies should be encouraged to reproduce, which bodies should be discouraged from reproducing. And so reproductive justice points that out, that we're never talking about the attack on abortion in isolation without the attempt of white men to perpetually control an anti-democratic process, an authoritarian state that compels white women to have more babies while they kill off as many Black and brown ones as they can. You cannot even consider gender politics without taking a racial analysis in a racialized capitalist system sculpted by reproductive politics. And so it's never the itty bitty issue that people think it is. It tends to explain everything if you use the appropriate lens. I mean, reproductive suppression is what they wanted indigenous people to disappear, to reproductively disappear, which you ended up with massive, not only the actual genocide against indigenous people, but massive sterilization campaigns against them, as well as the distribution of blankets infected with smallpox to make them disappear. And so, the first anti-immigration bill was the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. And then once they even started letting more Chinese people in, it wasn't until 1964 that they took the restriction off of Chinese women, because they didn't want Chinese men to have babies with Chinese women, kind of thing. They also didn't want them to have with white women either, because the anti-miscegenation laws, the interracial marriage laws, were passed in 1924, the same time the Johnson anti-immigration quota bill was passed and stuff. And so I'm not quite sure how you can look at both biological and non-biological issues without using a reproductive justice lens to connect these dots so that you have a coherent analysis that explains things that look like they are disconnected, but in fact are not, particularly in the eyes of our human rights opponents.
Oh, that's a beautiful answer. Yes, and I guess if I could follow up on that, in terms of the present moment, or I guess the question is a three-part question, so answer any part that seems useful, right, or that you're interested in answering. But do you feel like in terms of tactics and strategies, activist tactics and strategies, that there are lessons that you've learned through this long history of organizing and of activism, or do you have any advice for emergent activists that are looking to embrace a reproductive justice framework, but also looking to engage, find an entry point and engage in this, this current moment and the urgencies of this current moment? And then I'll ask the questions that I see are posted. Okay, great. Okay.
Well, for the last 6 years, I've been working on the theory of calling in the calling out culture.
Yes, I know.
Because it's very important for us to understand that how we do our activism is as important as the activism that we do.
Yep.
And within the progressive movement, I find too much punching sideways, where we're thinking that we are holding people accountable, but in fact, we're criticizing everybody's work but our own, everybody's political position except our own kind of stuff. And we are micro dividing ourselves in my girlfriend Dazon calls it, we're in a woke competition, and she calls it the woking dead. Which I think is just
It's good.
so accurate to describe how competitive social justice work has become in a very non-productive and self-destructive way.
Mhm.
And so instead of focusing on any one particular issue, even though I teach a course called White Supremacy in the Age of Trump, so I'm never going to take my eye off of the fascists, because that's my primary concern. I believe that as a human rights movement, we weaken ourselves in our ability to take on the fascists if we micro divide based on our perceptions that we're right, they're wrong, kind of binary thinking that doesn't work, isn't a reflection of reality, and doesn't build movement, but uses cult-like behaviors to exclude people who don't know the latest lingo, that doesn't get the gender pronoun right, that doesn't know to use neoliberal capitalism as our language, and heteropatriarchy and normativity and all those great words that we're learning. Um, and so I believe we have to pivot from the call out culture into a culture that calls people in. And we've got to let go of our egos, let go of the woking dead competition, stop believing that there's only one right way up to the mountaintop, that our diversity of identities and opinions is actually our strength. And we need to start acting like a movement and not a cult. And so I've written a lot of articles on that over the last couple of years. I did a TED talk on it this past summer, if you're interested in watching it. And I've got a book coming out next year on calling in the calling out culture. But I am so begging people to get the F over yourself. Because, first of all, if you think you're in a woke competition, all you're proving to the seasoned activists is how unwoke you actually are. you know? Because you don't know how to build movement, you know how to grandstand. And then there's something really troubling me about people who indulge in the call outs too much, and that is, why do you think causing more pain in the world is the way to heal the world? Why are you choosing to blow up people's lives, careers, and reputations?
Yeah.
And is that how you really want to walk through the world?
And can that's a good follow-up question, I think, is here in the Q&As, which is, so we know it doesn't work and we're seeing it, right? In the kind of call out culture, woke culture. But the question is, what strategies have been most consistently successful in your experience at drawing people into coalition work who didn't previously see or accept their role in this work, or who were not obvious choices to involve in the coalition work? I think the question really is about what are the strategies for drawing people into coalition work? That's a strategy.
Okay. You have to hire me to come back and give a separate presentation on calling. Okay. I certainly can't do that in seconds.
All right.
But all calling in starts with self-assessment, making sure that you're in a healed enough space to build a container to listen to people who don't agree with you. And if you're getting triggered simply by the fact that someone doesn't clone your ideas, you're not in a healed enough space to actually do effective coalition work. And you need to prioritize your healing. Because if you're still bleeding, all you're going to do is bleed on over everybody who needs to work with you. And they're going to walk around on eggshells around you for fear that you're going to blow up on them next. And that's not the way to build movement. And moreover, our human rights movement is not your public therapy space. Our job is to end oppression. That's it. And so if you need that kind of attention that you're trying to call to yourself by the call out culture, then I would suggest you get some help somewhere else. Because if being oppressed ain't easy, why do you think fighting is supposed to be safe and easy? I mean, where did that crazy thought come from? we're up against the most ruthless MFs in the world. And it is supposed to be safe and easy and not make you uncomfortable and not make you encounter words that make you squirm. I mean, really, I think we have a problem matching our expectations with the reality of how the world should work. But I say, if you try to learn social justice activism by doom scrolling over the internet, that's kind of like learning good sex by watching bad pornography. It ain't gonna work. That ain't how it's done, you know. And so I really do wish people would say that there are very appropriate uses of call out when people are abusing their power over other people and committing human rights violations. That's what we do as a human rights movement. But the left is too busy overusing it. We're not punching upwards against people in power. We're punching sideways just because somebody didn't get a word right. You know, I mean, or, told a joke that we didn't agree with because it didn't land well on us, or just blurted out something totally innocently that then you interpreted as causing harm. The worst words we can use right now, in my opinion, is I don't feel safe, that person is toxic, I'm being harmed, or they're hurting my mental condition. We use all those words to keep from hell growing the hell up. And I'm a little tired of it.
Laura, do you have time for one more question? I'll try to.
Yeah, because I do need to leave in about 2 minutes.
I know I can combine some of these questions. I think that a number of the questions are really asking about using a reproductive justice framework and supporting a reproductive justice framework through scholarship, and what kinds of scholarship, or sort of how can students and scholars contribute to a reproductive justice framework? What's the work that's most useful in that domain? Or and you could also answer it with the activist domain too, whichever you prefer.
Well, with the 3 books I've co-written, what we tried to do was lay down breadcrumbs for the books that we hope come afterwards. I would like to read a really path-breaking book on the manipulation of white women's wombs through a reproductive justice analysis, because most of the books I read only take a gender lens, not an intersectional one. Yeah, I would like to read how reproductive justice and disability justice intersect more, because I hear the disability rights movement talking about the right to be born, but they're spending less time on the right to parent with social support so that you can raise a disabled child. And so I would like to see that conversation taking place. I would like to see conversation about fat shaming and body sizes and reproductive justice. There's so many more books to be written on reproductive justice. Almost anything one writes would be new and add to the canon.
So I think the other thing to say, and I want to make sure because I know you have a place you need to be, another Zoom call you need to be on.
Yeah, University of Pennsylvania has me booked for 7 o'clock.
Right. So, so I don't want you to be late, but I do just want to express the many, many thanks that are in these. And I'm sorry, everyone, I didn't get to all your specific questions. I was trying to kind of group them together. But people, thanking you so much for being here, saying how grateful we are that you're here, how fortunate we are to have you with us and to talk to us. So, and I'll echo that and say we're so delighted that you were here, and thank you for your wisdom and your fierce years of organizing to the present. Right? Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you. I've been through a lot, and I've turned my lived knowledge into wisdom. Absolutely. A little bit, anyway. Bye.
All right. Thank you so much, Loretta Ross. See ya.